People, what's the closest you've ever been to a real-life corn scenario? I work for a furniture delivery company, and one day we got a call to go check out an issue with a woman's sectional. When my partner and I pulled up, the place was swarming with about a dozen guys working on the exterior. Looked like a full renovation. We finally make our way inside and are greeted by this really cute woman from Brazil. She had a gorgeous look and a soft accent that made even her broken English sound charming. She tried to explain what was wrong, and after a little back and forth, we realized the previous crew hadn't properly attached the sectional pieces. It took me and my partner maybe 3 minutes to fix it. While we worked, she and I kept things light and friendly, borderline flirty, but I didn't think much of it. People are often extra nice when you're helping them out. Once we finished, I handed her the paperwork to sign, and she suddenly says, "Wait." She grabs my hand, leads me to the basement door, and starts walking downstairs. I ask, should I follow? And she says, yes. I glance at my partner. He gives me this knowing look, pats me on the shoulder, and says, "I'll be in the truck." So I followed her downstairs, still not fully believing what might be happening. I figure maybe she needs help moving something. Because honestly, I don't have that kind of luck. But I get to this dimly lit room, and it's just a bed and a nightstand. At that point, all my skepticism evaporates. She's digging through the nightstand, and I assume she's looking for a protection to use. But instead, she turns around with 2 $20 bills and says, "Tip." And that was it. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I used to install swimming pools in the summer. My team were basically the startup team. We did all the plumbing of the equipment, pump, heater, etc., and installed the liner and interior elements. We were installing at a nice lakefront neighborhood, and the homeowner/client was very keen on asking us regularly when it would be ready since we were at peak summer temperatures. So, we get to work on our final day. The pool is full and finishing touches are being put out, ladder, faceplates, and whatnot. My boss is finishing the plumbing when the homeowner, a mid-40s woman on the thicker side with curves in the right places and long brown hair, comes out of the house in a less than modest bikini. Definitely a tanning in my private backyard bikini, and nada there's 2 complete strangers working 10 feet away bikini. And then out steps her daughter, and let's just say she got all of mom's genes on a skinnier body. I ended up being right about the tanning bikini part because they proceeded to lie down on their lounge chairs, oil up, face down, and remove their tops. I breathed a sigh of relief as Mama started a lecture about, "You're in your 2nd year now, and textbooks are going to cost more." I was finished with my work at that point, and was about to warn my boss around the side of the house about the impromptu corno session occurring around the corner. Just as I'm getting up from the deck of the pool, I hear the creak of the rusty spring at the back door of the house. Out steps the 3rd actress in today's scene. It turns out the character playing daughter invited her best friend to the occasion. She was just inside the whole time, changing into yet another bikini. Then out comes my boss from around the corner of the house. Before he even looks up from the rag he's wringing with his hands, he begins his, "All right, so everything looks good" speech, only to turn beet red and chuckle to himself as he tries to look for a nearby distraction. But this is real life, and we all just had a laugh about it. The mother apologizes to my boss for embarrassing him while he gave her a quick instruction on operating the pump, pun intended. When we got back to the van after wrapping up, he took a long drag from his cigarette and blew it out the window. "All right, you can tell your friends about this, but leave me out of it. I'm married." Story 3. One summer, I was on a backpacking trip with a friend of mine. We had been hiking and camping for about 2 weeks under the blazing July sun, so naturally we were both sweaty, smelly, and sporting full beards. After a particularly grueling day, we were completely wiped out and decided to take the road down the mountain into a nearby town to grab some more food. As we made our way down, we came across a car pulled over on the side of the road, clearly having some mechanical issues. The car was being driven by 2 stunning college girls, likely headed to the beach or lake for the weekend. They were wearing nothing but bikini tops and Daisy Dukes, pacing around their broken-down vehicle, trying to figure out what was going on. Just as we approached, a police cruiser pulled over about 25 yards behind them to lend a hand. The officer who stepped out wasn't a seasoned, grizzled veteran. No, it was a 20-something female cop, just as attractive as the 2 girls. I turned to my buddy and give him a look as if to say, "This is the most corno situation I'll ever be in my life." Don't mess this up for me. He locks eyes with me and gives a knowing nod. We both understand the mission ahead. With steely resolve, we brace ourselves and walk toward the trio of beautiful women, who are now gathered around the raised hood of their car, inspecting the smoking engine. We get close enough to hear the conversation, and the tension in the air is almost tangible. Nervously, we call out, "Hey ladies, need a hand?" The lady cop turns to face us, lowering her aviators to peer over the top at the two scruffy guys standing before her. Without missing a beat, she calmly tells us that she's got everything under control and that we really shouldn't be walking along the shoulder of a state highway. Our hopes of an unforgettable encounter are dashed, so we make a swift exit. We get ice cream instead, and that sort of makes up for it. Story 4. I work in IT, and on the side, I offer on-site computer repair through my city's Facebook page. Most of the time, it's simple stuff like setting up printers or getting new computers running. One day, I received a message from a woman saying her daughter's laptop was showing an error when turning on. Her daughter was home from college for the weekend, and she asked if I could come by that day. I didn't have any plans, so I agreed. The mom, probably in her 50s, was stunning for her age. She invited me in and mentioned that her daughter would be out of the shower soon and would hand me the laptop. A few minutes later, her daughter came out looking like she definitely took after her mom. She was wearing boy shorts, a tight shirt, and had wet hair. She handed me the laptop, and I sat at the kitchen table to work on it. The daughter pulled up a chair and sat right next to me, asking me a bunch of questions while I worked. I fixed the laptop, and her mom paid me the agreed amount. As I was leaving, the mother and daughter walked me out, thanking me again. When I turned around on the front porch to say, "No problem, have a good day," the daughter had her arm around her mom. The mom, still smiling, asked, "Is there anything else we can do for you?" She immediately realized how that sounded and quickly corrected herself, asking if I had any business cards to hand out. Meanwhile, the daughter was blushing, trying not to laugh. As I walked away, I could hear the daughter teasing her mom. A couple of months later, the mom reached out again, this time asking for help setting up their Ring doorbell. When I arrived, she apologized profusely for the earlier encounter, assuring me it wasn't meant as an advance. It was a funny situation, and honestly, it kind of felt like the start of a scene from a cheesy porno movie. Story 5. A girl I knew asked if I could come over and help her move some boxes left behind by the previous tenant in her apartment. When I got there, I knocked on the door. It was slightly open, and I could tell she was home. She had mentioned the previous tenant was kind of a sketchy guy and had caused her some trouble, so I was already a little on edge. I stepped inside and was just about to call out her name when, bam, she walked into the room completely bare. I froze like, whoa, okay. But before I could even process what was happening, she screamed, covered herself, and bolted back into the other room. Turns out she had just got out of the shower and hadn't heard me knock. Definitely not the kind of welcome either of us expected. Awkward moment? Absolutely. But we laughed it off later, and we're still good friends to this day. Story 6. As a commercial electrician, I often work on tenant improvement, TI projects, which means I'm in buildings where people are already living or working. Over the years, I've had some memorable encounters, some of which led to a bit of fun. Here are two very different stories. In my late 20s, I was working on a school building. Though this wasn't technically a TI job, it's still part of the story. My boss brought in a young couple to help out, and they showed up on a shaky 350 cubic centimeters motorcycle, arguing loudly. The woman, let's call her Gina, jumped off before the bike even came to a full stop, yelling, "Screw you, you loser," before storming over to introduce herself. She was a busty redhead with a sharp tongue, and her husband was a thin, jittery guy. I showed them the ropes, keeping them separated as she requested. Over the next few days, I learned they were married but living apart, crashing at his mom's place until she could afford her own place. One day, I was doing my rounds, checking on everyone, and Gina was the last person I saw working alone in a small building, installing plugs. She was kneeling down, her hair parted around her neck, and I noticed a circular tattoo on the back of her neck with a goofy girl's face in the center. Curious, I leaned in to read the words, but as I got closer, she turned around and looked up at me. Realizing I was standing a bit too close, I quickly apologized, saying I was trying to read her tattoo. With a grin, she told me it read, "Good girls blow it, bad girls swallow." I pointed out that it was upside down, and she confidently corrected me. "No, it isn't." It took me a moment, but when I got the joke, I smirked and said, "Oh, Gina worked with us for about 5 months before she moved to Wichita, Kansas." But in that time, I definitely learned she wasn't just talking about tattoos when she mentioned being a bad girl. Another time, I was working near ASU, a few blocks away from some high-end apartments worth about $1.5 million. One morning, I walked upstairs to check on the crew, and I found all the guys, framers, plumbers, electricians, gathered around a window, staring out at one of the apartments. Curious, I turned around and saw a woman, completely bare, stretching and bending in full view. The large picture window gave us an unobstructed view of her from the knees up. She turned around and bent over, stretching some more. The crew all urged me to join them from about 20 feet away, so I wouldn't ruin the view. I waved at her from outside the window, and she definitely saw me. For over a month, every day at 10:20 a.m., she'd open the drapes and go through a long stretching routine while making her bed. Later, I ran into her in an elevator, and she asked if I'd enjoyed the show. I joked that I was complaining, and she invited me to stop by sometime. It turned out she'd extended the same offer to a few other guys too. When people asked why I became an electrician, I used to joke, "I'm in it for the chicks." After seeing more than a few women bear it all on the job, I guess there was more truth to that joke than I realized. Story 7. When I first started university abroad, they had an orientation for international students. At one point, they asked all of us to stand up, introduce ourselves, say where we were from, standard stuff. A few days later, I was walking home to the off-campus hostel I was staying at when I saw 2 girls standing by the gate. I said hi as I passed, and one of them stopped me. "Hey, you stay here?" "Cool, I do too. I'm Rita." I was about to introduce myself when she cut me off and said she already knew who I was. She'd heard me speak during orientation. Her friend introduced herself too, then dipped, leaving me alone with Rita, who, by the way, was pretty cute. We chatted for a bit, just casual small talk. Then she mentioned her heater wasn't working properly. I didn't think too hard about it at the time, so I offered to take a look and maybe fix it. In hindsight, yeah, there were people assigned to handle stuff like that in the building, but, I mean, come on. So, we headed up to her room. It was a small portable heater that connected to a shower head. I started messing with it, trying to get it to work. It wasn't until I was kneeling there fiddling with the thing that it hit me how ridiculously adult film set up this situation felt. Then, while I'm still trying to get it working, she casually asks if I have a girlfriend. I tell her no, which was true. Then she says, "I have a boyfriend, but things aren't really good between us right now." That line had weight. Anyway, I finally get the heater working, and the water starts heating up. She yells in excitement, jumps on me in a hug, and we end up stumbling backward into the bathroom, where I had left the shower running to test the water. We both get soaked and just start laughing. One thing led to another, and we ended up making out. And yeah, we slept together. It was actually the first time I'd ever hooked up with someone the same day I met them. Funny, I hadn't thought about that day in a long time until just now. Story 8. As a tradesman, I had an experience I never expected. I was working away when the young, attractive housewife walked in front of me, wearing nothing but lingerie. I was completely stunned. This kind of thing doesn't happen. She didn't say a word, just stood there, giving me a playful smile. You're probably wondering what happened next, right? Well, I'll never know, because just as I was trying to process it, her husband pulled into the driveway, and she quickly ran off. When he came inside, it was incredibly awkward, like nervous, stuttering awkward. Story 9. I had a friend who fancied himself to be an artist, and he wanted to create something with car parts. So he called me up to help him go to the junkyard and pull some pieces apart since I knew cars and had the right tools. After a full day of pulling doors, seats, tires, sheet metal, and all sorts of parts off of junk cars in the heat, I was wiped out, but I agreed to help him carry everything to his backyard. That turned out to be a good decision. So, here's where it gets interesting. His neighbor's daughter had just turned 21, and her parents had specifically gone out of town so she could throw a party. There were about 15 to 20 girls, all between 19 and 24, partying around the pool. Many of them were enjoying the all-girls vibe by going topless, and most were drinking. My buddy, who might be the most stereotypical gay guy I've ever met, sat and chatted with the girls while I unloaded the truck. By the time I was done, we were not only at the party, but I was also being served drinks. My friend was playing the role of wingman, talking me up, mentioning how I always help him out with straight guy stuff. I'll admit it. I wasn't exactly sharp enough to take advantage of the situation that day. Maybe not stupid. Most of the girls were pretty drunk, and I wouldn't have felt comfortable making a move anyway. But I just sat there, enjoyed the scene for a while, and thanked them for the drinks before heading home. A few of the girls added me on social media, but it mostly ended up being just a fun memory to look back on. Story 10. I've never quite had an experience like this, but this one comes pretty close. When I was a senior in high school, I worked as a cashier at a grocery store. The store was right off the highway and had a few hotels next door, so we got a lot of travelers passing through, and every now and then a celebrity would stop by. One evening, a group of 4 stunning 20-something women came through my line. They looked like your typical college girls, confident, stylish, and gorgeous. I was 18 at the time, still in that awkward phase where I had gone through puberty but was far from being a man. I was skinny and looked younger than I actually was, definitely not the kind of guy I would have expected these girls to take any interest in. Their entire order consisted of a few bottles of wine in Boone's Farm, an abnormally large cucumber, a pack of fresh strawberries, 2 cans of whipped cream, and some rubbers. I jokingly said something like, "Looks like you girls are in for a fun evening. Can I come?" It was just me messing around, no real expectation, just trying to be funny. Without missing a beat, one of the girls responded, "If you're coming with us, we'd insist on it." We all laughed, and they paid for their things. Right before they walked away, one of the other girls said, "Seriously, if you want to hang out, we're in room 232 next door. You should come over when you get off." I didn't even get a chance to respond. They just walked out, leaving me standing there, completely stunned. They might have been messing with me, sending me to the wrong room for a laugh, but I definitely spent more than a few moments imagining what could have happened with those 4 girls that night. I had a girlfriend at the time, so I passed on the offer. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a tough choice. Story 11. Back in college, I worked cleaning pools, and one day, a customer's wife came out to the pool wearing a little black dress. She casually started talking about how her husband was out of town for a few days and mentioned she could really use a man to help her with some things inside. Completely oblivious to what was happening, I responded with something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. I just clean pools. I don't really know much about home repairs." Story 12. When I was 20, I worked as a pizza delivery guy, mostly for cash, and the pizza, let's be honest. Every now and then, the cool manager would let us make our own pies at the end of the shift, perfect for starving college students. So one hot, sticky Texas evening, I'm out delivering pizzas at the start of the school year. My last stop is at this apartment complex. I climb the stairs and notice the windows are open, fans blowing. Turns out the AC's out in the whole building. I knock on the door, and this gorgeous college girl answers, wearing a men's t-shirt. It's a sweltering night, and she's got her hair up in a messy bun, except for that one rebellious strand. Her arms and legs are glistening with sweat, and there's this hungry, almost mischievous look in her eyes. I pull the pizza out of its warming sleeve, and she hands me cash for the order. "Sorry," she says, "I don't have enough for a tip." She sets the box down and looks me over, then adds, "But I think I've got something you'll like." And then she hands me a can of beer. Story 13. I noped out of gay groupie while delivering pizzas. A few years ago, when I was in my mid-20s, I was renting from an elderly Asian couple who owned the place. One year, they threw a holiday party, and I ended up meeting one of their friends, a woman in her late 40s or early 50s who was still in great shape and very attractive. She was married to a much older white guy, probably in his late 70s, who wasn't doing too well health-wise. The guy could barely walk at a normal pace. We were chatting casually, and she mentioned needing help organizing some data on her computer since she wasn't very tech-savvy. Apparently, the owners had mentioned that I was good with computers, so she asked for my number to discuss the project later. A few days later, she called and explained what she needed. I told her it sounded like something I could do and suggested she just email me the files, and I'd work on it in my spare time. But then she came up with an excuse about needing me to come over to her place to do the work. I agreed, and a couple of days later, I went over. She answered the door wearing a white halter top, short jean shorts, and high-heeled sandals, on a day that was actually kind of chilly. Her greeting was unexpectedly touchy-feely. She casually mentioned that her husband wasn't home and led me to the office to show me the files she wanted organized. I started working on it, but not long after, she came back in and asked if I needed anything to make myself more comfortable, still with that smile and touchy-feely vibe. Looking back now, it definitely felt like something out of a fantasy, the kind of thing I would normally have gone for. But when I was actually in the moment, it felt super awkward and wrong. I could tell what she was hinting at, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was because I had met her husband and shaken his hand, or maybe because she was friends with my landlords. Whatever the reason, I quickly finished the work and left, even though she kept saying she had to pay me for it as I was walking out. I don't know, it just didn't feel right, so I didn't stick around. Story 14. I had a corn scenario that didn't involve being a plumber or delivery guy or anything, but did involve a hot mom. Years ago, one of my friends had a mom that still is, ridiculously hot. I'm talking 10 out of 10, total stereotype. We always gave him crap for it. She was in her late 30s at the time, maybe 40, but looked as if she was in her late 20s. I cannot stress this enough. She was hot. Full package. Great body, gorgeous face, ample jugs, and a great buns. Anyway, as we all got older, she became a little bit flirtier with her son's friends. Nothing too forward or inappropriate, but she was divorced, and you could tell she liked pretending as though she was still in her more youthful years. One day, however, she started being way more forward with me in particular. To set the scene, I should mention that she was a smoker. Not a heavy smoker, mind you, she exercised and took care of herself, but she'd have a few cigarettes a day, and if she was drinking, she'd often chain smoke. I wasn't a regular smoker, but I did have the occasional cigarette back in high school. It wasn't a daily habit, just something I did in the moment like any other teenager. My parents, however, were on and off smokers at the time. They've since quit. One Saturday afternoon when I was 18, my parents went out of town for the day. I was home alone bored and figured, why not? And decided to smoke a cigarette. Unbeknownst to me, my friend's mom had spoken to my mom earlier that day and needed to swing by to pick something up. While I was smoking, I heard the doorbell ring. Thinking it was just a FedEx delivery or something, I peeked down the hall and saw my friend's mom through the window. My heart dropped as I quickly disposed of the cigarette and nervously went to answer the door. She greeted me with her usual cheerful smile and explained why she was there. I let her inside, but after a few moments, she casually remarked, smells like cigarettes in here, with a sly grin. I tried to play it cool, saying something like, oh, my parents smoke, so that's probably what you're smelling. She raised an eyebrow and replied, you can't fool me. Do you smoke? She had a playful smile on her face, so it didn't feel like she was scolding me, but I still felt hesitant to admit it. I fumbled through my words, and she laughed before saying, come on, you can tell me. I can keep secrets. That's when I finally confessed, and I made her swear not to tell my parents, which she promised to do. This is where everything kind of set things in motion. She stuck around for a few minutes, and we shared a cigarette while making small talk. She mentioned that she was used to having to hide her smoking from her ex-husband, so she totally understood my reluctance to tell her. Before leaving, she casually brought up the idea of us sneaking a cigarette together sometime. Over the next couple of years, we smoked together whenever I was at my buddy's house. I never really became a smoker, but I saw it as a way to spend some one-on-one time with an incredibly attractive woman. Then, during my last semester of high school, after I turned 18, something pretty much every young guy dreams of happened in the most unexpected way. It was another weekend, my parents were out of town, and I was just hanging out at home. At some point, I realized I'd forgotten to turn in part of my history paper the previous Friday, the works cited/sources page, and I started freaking out. I called my teacher, who told me if I could get it to his mailbox at school that day, everything would be fine. But if I couldn't get it to him until Monday, I'd lose points. The problem? My car was in the shop, and my parents were out of town. So I called my friend. He didn't answer his cell phone, so I tried his house phone. He lived just a few minutes away, so it seemed like my best shot. His mom answered instead. I explained the situation, but she told me he was also out of town visiting his grandparents for the weekend. Then she offered to give me a ride, and of course I accepted. A few minutes later, she pulled up in the driveway. I hopped in the passenger seat, and we were on our way. She offered me a cigarette, I thanked her for the ride, and she teased, well, now you owe me a favor, so I'm going to hold you to it. I laughed and agreed. The drive to my high school was just shy of half an hour, and we'd pass her house on the way there and back. After I dropped off the missing part of my paper, she mentioned she had some errands to run and asked if I'd accompany her, which I was more than happy to do. We stopped by the post office and grocery store, and on the way back, we were stopped at a traffic light when she noticed one of her friends in the lane next to us. They rolled down their windows to chat, and her friend asked, "Who's the handsome young man?" She jokingly replied that I was her new boyfriend. We all laughed, and then we continued on our way. As we were getting closer to her house, she casually mentioned the favor I owed her. She had done quite well financially from her previous marriage and lived in a spacious house with a big yard. She explained that she had some heavy flower pots and other items she needed to move into the storage shed in her backyard and asked if I could help. I, completely unaware of what might come next, agreed without hesitation. We arrived at her house, and I helped her move the items into the shed. Once that was done, I figured it was time to head home. She thanked me for helping, and before I could say anything, she asked if I wanted to join her for a cigarette. I shrugged and agreed. She led me up the back porch that led into a downstairs bedroom. She went inside for a moment to grab her cigarettes, and when she came back out, she offered me one, and we lit up. A few moments later, she asked, "Oh, you haven't seen the remodeling I'm doing in this room, have you?" I hadn't, of course. She invited me to come inside and said she'd show me some pictures. Knowing she didn't usually smoke in the house, I hesitated and started to put out my cigarette, but she waved it off and said, "No, it's fine." She then pulled out some photos of work that contractors she hired had done in other homes. I didn't know much about interior decorating and didn't really care, but I pretended to be interested. And that's when things took a turn. She stubbed out her cigarette and said she was going to go grab a Diet Coke and asked if I wanted one. She came back and said she had some other photos of the room she wanted to show me, to see what I thought. As she opened the drawer to pull out more photos and began flipping through them, suddenly bam! Photos of her in a suggestive pose in the same room we were standing in. I was completely speechless and got a stiffy instantly. "Oh, that's not supposed to be there." She wore a sly smile. She sarcastically said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I managed to mutter, "Oh my God," before she said, "Well, do you like them?" Of course, I frigging liked them. I loved them. She asked if I'd like to keep any of them. I managed to say something like, it would just be great. I had no idea what I was trying to say, but she finished my sentence for me anyway, saying, "If we bang." Then we immediately went to work. She said, "You know, I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to do this for the longest time." I replied with, "Oh, you have no idea." We banged for a good 45 minutes or so. I was determined to make that crap last as long as possible since I didn't know if I'd ever get to do it again. Turned out I did. Since no one else was in the house, she was very audible. To this day, it is the best one I ever had. She drove me home a little while later and teased that we'd have to do it again sometime. We did end up doing it again, but it was a couple years later when I came home for a couple weeks from college. Story 15. I was 20 and living at home while my parents were away on holiday. I was in the garage trying to figure out the washing machine settings, but wasn't sure which to use, so I had the garage door open. The young mother from next door, with whom I'd had a few flirty conversations, saw me and said hi. I asked her what setting I should use, expecting her to shout the answer across the yard. But instead, she walked over, asked what I was washing, and then casually stepped into the garage. She squatted down in front of the washing machine to inspect the dials. As she crouched, I couldn't help but notice that her head was at the perfect height for me. I was wearing gray sweatpants and no underwear, and I ended up getting a semi. As she adjusted the dials, I was pretty sure she could tell. She glanced at the outline of my body, then looked up at me before standing back up. She told me what settings she'd use and explained why. She hooked her thumbs into her jean short pockets, standing next to me as we both looked at the washing machine, making small talk. There was a noticeable tension in the air. She slowly let her little finger brush against my hip, then down to my thigh. I had to decide whether to try and hide the fact that I was getting a stiffy, but in the end, I didn't. It was obvious. We didn't say anything about it, but I stood there, embarrassed and visibly excited, while her fingers traced over it. I looked at her. We kissed. Then she immediately dropped to her knees, lifted her top, and gave me the best blowy ever. After I was done, she pulled her top down, kissed my cheek, and said to let her know if any of my laundry shrinks. She had such skills, felt like she was trying to show she wasn't just a mom, But the hottest part was the scenario and how it developed. Story 16. I'm a lifeguard, and while I'm not sure how often situations like this show up in adult films, this one definitely had that kind of vibe. After the pool closes, we give customers 15 minutes to shower and get dressed before we go in to clean the changing rooms. Even after that time, I always knock and call into the women's changing room to check if anyone is still inside, just to be polite. I do this because I'm a guy, and sometimes people are still finishing up, so I give them a little extra time. One evening I knocked, opened the door slightly, and called out, "Hello." When I didn't get a response, I walked in and found a woman standing there completely bare. I jumped, quickly apologized, and turned away to give her some privacy. But as I was leaving, she called out, "Wait, can I ask you something?" She then started asking me random questions while she soaped herself up, completely unfazed. She didn't make any attempt to cover up, just chatting casually like it was no big deal. I did my best to answer her questions without looking directly at her. Later, when I was cleaning the showers, she came back into the room wearing only an inner and continued chatting with me, still not bothering to cover herself. Looking back, I'm pretty sure something could have happened if I had taken the opportunity. Story 17. I was seeing this redhead for a few weeks, absolute knockout, and the chemistry between us was insane. One night, we hit up this outdoor concert. Halfway through, the skies open up and it starts pouring. We make a run for it back to my car, drenched and laughing the whole way. We head back to her place, strip off our soaked clothes, toss them in the dryer, and decide to hop in the shower while we wait. She had one of those vintage clawfoot tubs, and things got steamy real quick. I ended up picking her up and doing it against the wall so hard we actually nudged the tub out of place. No complaints from either side. Afterward, we're in her room, towels wrapped around us, making small talk like nothing just happened, but the tension was still thick. I pulled her onto the bed, and round 2 kicked off. By the time our clothes dried, we cleaned up, got dressed, and met up with some of her friends for drinks. Great night, good vibes. When we got back later, things picked right back up. She gave me a blowy, I returned the favor, and round 3 sealed the deal. She was a blast. But then she got weird, totally ghosted me, moved away out of nowhere, and I didn't hear from her again, until like 6 months later, when she hit me up wanting to hang out like nothing ever happened. Yeah, I passed on that one. Story 18. A few years back, I matched with this woman on OkCupid. She was in her late 30s, and I was around 20 at the time. I messaged her mostly just for conversation. I wasn't expecting to meet up or hook up or anything like that. Fast forward a couple of months, and she hit me up asking if I could help change the brakes on her car. Said she'd pay me. I told her, "No worries, I'll do it for free. It's a quick job, like 30 minutes tops." So, I swing by and get it done. Right after, she says, "I know you said not to pay you, but I have to repay you somehow." Then, without much warning, she takes off her top and gives me quite literally the best blowy I've ever had. No exaggeration. We ended up hooking up a few more times after that. And yeah, I still occasionally revisit the pictures she sent me. For those wondering, yes, I'm a mechanic. At the time, it was a relatively new Corolla and just needed the front brakes done. With the right tools, 30 minutes is totally doable. Probably took a little longer, to be honest. Story 19. I'm a personal trainer, and one time a client asked me to start training her at home after she lost access to her gym. We always had a good vibe, friendly, professional, and never any flirty energy. Plus, she was married, so I never thought twice about it. The first time I showed up to her place, she answered the door in a robe and told me she just woke up from a nap. I half-joked, asking why she'd nap before a workout instead of saving it for after. And she gave me this look like I had completely missed the point. Then she casually invited me upstairs. She walks straight into her bedroom, and I follow, still totally thinking we're about to do some bodyweight circuits or something. I even asked, "Are we working out up here?" Then she drops the robe. Yeah, took me a second, but the message was very clear. We didn't even make it to the bed, partially because I felt weird about doing it in her actual bedroom. But we ended up in the guest room, the living room, and even the upstairs loft. It was like 8 months worth of tension, all hitting at once, all over that poor house. And no, I definitely didn't charge her for that session. Story 20. When I was 18, I went to a friend's birthday party during what ended up being the biggest snowstorm of the year. There was no way I was getting home that night, but I knew the birthday guy well enough to crash on his couch. A few others, people I didn't know super well, also ended up spending the night. Fast forward to around 3 a.m. I'm lying on this brutally uncomfortable couch in the corner of the living room, trying to fall asleep. But I was a total night owl back then, so I wasn't really sleeping, just faking it and hoping exhaustion would eventually do its thing. On the floor nearby were two girls I kind of knew. One of them was the younger sister of a girl I'd gone to public and high school with, and the other would become a better friend of mine later on. They were both a couple years younger than the rest of us, so I figured they'd just conk out like everyone else. You know, quiet, innocent sleepover vibes. Oh man, I was so wrong. These two had been attached at the hip all night, but I didn't think much of it. That is, until 3 a.m. rolls around and the room's supposed to be dead silent, and suddenly they start very aggressively making out on the floor. Like cartoonishly loud. After a few intense minutes of that, they giggle, get up, still holding hands, and head toward the basement. Now the couch I'm on? It's right next to the open-concept staircase leading down there. They didn't bother closing the door, and thanks to how enthusiastic they were down there, I didn't need to guess what was happening. Their sounds echoed through the stairwell like I was in the room with them. Not just vague sounds either, very specific, detailed, unmistakable noises. You could practically follow the timeline of events just by listening. And yeah, you could tell exactly when they were done. Eventually, they came back upstairs, disappeared into the bathroom to clean up, and then finally went to sleep. Only then was I finally able to do the same. The next morning, after they left, I told the birthday guy what I had accidentally witnessed, and he lost it laughing. Honestly, it was hilarious, after the awkwardness wore off. Pro tip: if you're gonna hook up at a friend's party, maybe don't do it right next to an open stairwell. You never know who's still awake and deeply regretting their choice of sleeping spot. Story 21. Back in my early 20s, I worked IT for a college. During the summer, they ran some accelerated classes, and there was this older woman, probably in her 40s, who came into the computer lab nearly every night. This was before laptops and tablets were everywhere, so the lab was the main place to get work done. She was a teacher working on some additional certification and wasn't from the area, so she stayed nearby during the week. I think she was taking 2 or 3 classes that summer. She'd often ask me for help with Microsoft Word and other tech stuff. It wasn't really part of my job, but I didn't mind. Summer shifts were quiet, my boss was never around, and I worked second shift until midnight, so I had time. By the end of the summer, we were on a first-name basis. We'd chat, joke around. It was a pretty easygoing vibe. On her last night there, she stopped by and struck up a conversation. My desk had this tall counter where students would usually place their laptops for help, and I noticed she was kind of leaning in, like literally on her toes, so that her chest rested on the edge of the counter. Naturally, my eyes followed, which I'm pretty sure was intentional. She caught me looking, smiled, and said, "You know, I'm heading home tomorrow, and you've been so great to me this whole summer. I think we should celebrate tonight, if you catch my drift." Then she gave a little bounce, just enough to push things up against the counter a bit more. I'd love to tell you I went back to her room and banged the crap out of her, but I laughed and declined. The reasons I didn't were, first of all, I didn't know her that well. Secondly, she was married and had a 13-year-old daughter at home. Finally, it was also my very first time at the time, and not really looking to lose my V-card in that manner. Story 22. While on a skiing holiday in France, we were hanging out in the receptionist's apartment. We'd become friends with the girls working at the front desk, and one night we were all just relaxing and smoking weed. At the time, I hadn't yet made a move with one of the girls, but there was definitely some tension between us. She was lying on her side on the bed with her back facing me, while I sat next to her. My friends were chilling around us, and we were just talking and listening to music. I was barely touching her, just a slight contact, but I was feeling too awkward from the weed to actually do anything about it. At one point, one of my friends joked, "We're heading to our room, but I think someone might want to stay." I looked at the girl and nervously asked, "Can I stay for a bit?" She turned to face me, looked me in the eyes, and replied, "Yeah, sure, we can talk." For the next minute, as my friends walked out, we just stared at each other, both knowing exactly what was about to happen. As soon as the door shut, we instantly started kissing, and things escalated quickly from there. It was definitely one of the hottest situations I've ever been in. Story 23. One time, my buddy's girlfriend asked me to come over to her apartment to fix the internet. A few times, I thought she might be making a move, but if she was, I didn't pick up on it, and I certainly wasn't interested in pursuing anything. I fixed the internet and went home. On another occasion, a girl, who was on again, off again with a buddy of mine, asked me to come over and help her with some guitar lessons. It was pretty clear she was interested in more than just learning, but her sister, who was constantly angry about something, was there and made things a bit uncomfortable. Another time, a girl invited me to her birthday party in her small dorm room. She'd mentioned she invited a bunch of people, but I didn't know her well and wasn't in the mood for a crowded dorm. Turns out, she only had a few people over earlier in the day, and they left, so she was expecting me to come later when it was just her. Story 24. I worked as a pizza delivery guy for about 3 years, and there was one particular girl I delivered to who caught my eye. I handed her the pizza, had her sign for it, and while she did, she casually posed in a way that definitely grabbed my attention. But true to my usual form, I didn't really say much. As she handed me back the receipt, she asked if I had a Facebook. I told her no, but I offered my phone number instead. Just a few minutes after I left, she texted me, sending some pretty flirtatious messages. After my shift, I went back to her place, and though things didn't happen right away, I eventually returned and things got a little more interesting. I'd say it still counts, right? Story 25. I run a small moving company, where I handle everything, estimates, calls the jobs with the help of employees, payroll, and so on. I started the business when I was 38 years ago, and I was in great shape at the time. Most of our clients are women between 25 to 35 years old who live in the city. I can think of a few instances that relate to this post. The first one was a woman I moved once, and then she called me again for another estimate when she was moving again. This happens pretty often. Some days I'll do 2 or 3 estimates. I showed up, and she was wearing the tightest jeans she owned, baking banana bread, and had a 6-pack of PBR on the counter. She offered me a beer, but I politely declined because I try to keep it professional. After talking for a bit about her move and looking up some options for her, my next estimate canceled via text. She offered another beer, and this time I accepted since I had some free time. We ended up drinking a couple of beers together. She was sitting really close to me, squeezing my arms and wanting to see my tattoos. I could tell where things were headed, and I was fine with it. We ended up making out and banged twice on the couch, then headed out for sushi. I ended up staying over and banging all night and took off the next morning when she went to work. We dated for a bit, but she was a little crazy. Next job was a move in a luxury high-rise for another repeat client. I got the truck loaded and was about to head out for the delivery when I realized I left my hoodie in the apartment. I left my guy in the truck and took the elevator back up to grab it. I should mention that when I'm working, I'm all business. If someone flirts with me, my mind is on the estimate and what furniture needs to be moved next. It's like autopilot, where my responses are just routine, and as long as the job runs smoothly, I'm in my own world. That being said, I think this girl might have been interested in me, but I didn't really notice at the time. When I knocked and she answered the door, she seemed a little worked up, but I didn't think much of it. I grabbed my sweatshirt, and then she started asking about my tattoos and squeezing my arm. Sound familiar? I declined the beer, since I had to drive the truck, and she told me I needed to relax. That's when a strange calm came over me, almost like an out-of-body experience. I felt like my head was floating above the situation, and it was like she was going to help me relax. She then went down and gave me a blowy. I told my employees that the elevator got stuck. The girl never made it weird for the rest of the job. I went to her new place multiple times after that for drunken late-night sessions. She was a nice girl, good person. I hope everyone enjoyed the read. Those days are over. I am engaged and have a beautiful 8-month-old daughter who is waking up from her nap. Time to be a daddy. Story 26. After a breakup, I was in the process of moving to a new apartment, juggling my belongings along with my ex's stuff. He had left to find himself in Bali, leaving me to handle everything. Emotionally fragile, doesn't even begin to describe how I felt that day. I hired a moving company that was a bit of a mess. They told me they had insurance, only to later admit it had expired. They showed up an hour late, but to be fair, they were 2 genuinely nice guys who worked fast. And yes, they were really attractive. When we arrived at my new place, they started unloading everything. I stepped out for a bit to grab pizza for all of us. When I came back, the owner, the hotter one of the two, apologized and told me they had accidentally forgotten my bed frame at the old apartment. But he assured me he'd go back, pick it up, and and drop it off later that night, after their next move. Sure enough, he texts me when he's on his way with the bed frame, and a little bit of playful flirting starts between us. He drops off the frame and awkwardly stands at my door. I offer him a drink. Fast forward a bit, and we're both hammered on Red Bull and raspberry vodka. Don't judge me, I had just moved, and then we did it on my couch. Story 27. I worked as a plumber for 2 months, which was my first real job sober. My sponsor owned the plumbing company, so he gave me a shot. On my second job, we were called to a condo in an upscale neighborhood in Houston. I was being trained by a more experienced guy, so he was with me. We knocked on the door, and a stunning woman answered, dressed in tight lycra shorts and a white tank top without a bra. I was 23 at the time, and all I could think was, wow. She led us upstairs to the master bedroom, and as we walked in, I noticed pictures of her on the walls. Upon closer inspection, I saw some of her posing with nothing, draped over curtains. We started working, and she stood in the doorway, almost like she was waiting for me to notice. When I did, she casually went to her closet, sat down, and looked right at me provocatively. I thought, this can't be real. She smiled, stood up, and slowly threw off her shirt and shorts, revealing a thin light blue inner. My trainer had his back to her and didn't notice. I quickly looked away to focus on the job, and when I looked back, she was leaving the room in a sundress. I didn't see her again until we were leaving. She handed my trainer some cash as a tip. As we walked to the van, she called out, "I think you forgot something." I turned around, and when she closed the door, she grabbed me. I was caught off guard, and before I knew it, my stiffy was in her hands. She whispered, "Next time, come alone." A month later, I got pulled over in the company van for speeding, and I found out I had a felony warrant I didn't even know about. That landed me in jail for 14 months. In a strange way, that experience ended up saving my life. Story 28. A while ago, I worked delivering large items that couldn't be handled by UPS or FedEx. Things like big screen TVs, ping pong tables, and treadmills, with the majority of my deliveries being TVs. The usual setup involved just unboxing the TV, placing it on the stand if the customer asked, and making sure it worked. We were supposed to have a partner for deliveries, but my company was pretty disorganized, so I often found myself going solo, figuring things out as I went, and sometimes asking customers to lend a hand. One day, about 2 years ago, I was completely burned out after a long shift. The clocks had just turned, and I realized I'd messed up the time on the van's clock. I called the customer to let her know I'd be 15 minutes away, even though I was actually an hour and 15 minutes out. I had to call back and correct myself, but fortunately, she was understanding and didn't mind at all, which made me feel a lot better. I finally arrived around 4 p.m., exhausted, with a 3-hour drive home ahead of me. I knocked on the door, but in my rush, I forgot the paperwork in the van. An older woman, probably in her late 40s or early 50s, answered. She was attractive, and I immediately apologized for the mix-up. I asked if she'd like me to set up the TV, and she agreed. As we chatted, she shared that she had moved there after a car accident, where she was rear-ended by drag racers. It turned into a nice conversation about her life, and why she chose to live in such a secluded area near Route 666. She told me more about her past, and our conversation became more relaxed. We started talking about random things, including NCIS, which I teased her about since it was my dad's favorite show, and she laughed. There was definitely some nervous energy between us, but we kept the conversation going. We even touched on some of my odd thoughts about life, and it felt like an unexpected connection. At one point, she showed me one of her hobbies, something artistic, and I complimented her on it. The tension was palpable, and I knew if I made a move, things could have gotten complicated. As tempting as it was, I held back. She was married, and I didn't want to do anything that might hurt that. It was a tough choice, but it felt like the right thing to do. I went back to the van to grab the paperwork I'd forgotten, and she signed it. We hugged, said our goodbyes, and I left. The drive home was a mix of emotions. I was grateful to have met such an interesting person, but also a little disappointed that nothing came of it. I often wonder if she still thinks about that day, because I know I do. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.